The auction block smelled like old money and desperation, and Kiera Zimmerman stood on it wearing a dress that wasn't hers, her wrists bound with silk rope that cost more than anything she'd ever owned. Her uncle Marcus had outdone himself this time. The gambling debts had piled so high that even selling the family estate hadn't covered half of what he owed, and so he'd done what men like him always did when they ran out of options. He'd sold what wasn't his to sell. The underground market occupied what had once been a grand ballroom beneath the city, all vaulted ceilings and chandeliers that now illuminated the sort of trade that happened only in whispers. Humans stood on raised platforms while creatures that looked almost human but moved with too much grace circled below, their pale skin luminous in the dim light, their eyes reflecting like cat's eyes when the light caught them just right. Vampires. The word still felt impossible in her mouth, even after 3 days locked in a basement room while her uncle made the arrangements. Even after seeing them with her own eyes, their white hair gleaming, their movements liquid and precise, their presence filling a room like a physical weight. "Gentlemen," the auctioneer called, his voice carrying across the space with practiced ease. "We have here a rare offering. 22 years of age, university educated, excellent health, no family ties beyond the uncle who presents her tonight." Kiera's jaw clenched. No family ties. As if her parents hadn't died in a car accident just 3 years ago, as if she hadn't spent the last year trying to manage the accounting firm they'd left behind while Marcus systematically drained every account he could access. She'd trusted him. She'd signed the papers he'd put in front of her, believing he was helping, believing family meant something. The bidding started low. A vampire in an expensive suit raised one elegant hand, his voice bored. 5,000. 10, another called, this one female, her white hair twisted into an elaborate braid. Kiera forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd spent the last 3 days planning. The ropes were silk, which meant they'd slide. The dress had no pockets, but the hem was loose. If she could get off this platform, if she could make it to the service exit she'd spotted when they'd brought her in, if she could run fast enough. 20,000, a new voice said, and something in the tone made every other vampire in the room go still. Kiera's eyes found him immediately. He sat in the back, away from the main cluster of bidders, and even seated, he radiated authority. His hair was pure white, longer than the others wore theirs, pulled back from a face that could have been carved from marble. He wore black, simple and elegant, and when he stood, the movement was so fluid it barely seemed like movement at all, more like one moment he was sitting and the next he simply wasn't. The crowd parted. They didn't scramble or rush, nothing so undignified, but they moved aside as he walked toward the platform with the certainty of nobles making way for royalty. 50,000, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly, and Kiera realized he wasn't even speaking loudly. The room had simply gone that quiet. "I will take her home." The auctioneer's professional composure cracked for just a moment. "Your Majesty, the bidding hasn't closed. It has now." The vampire climbed the 3 steps to the platform with inhuman grace, and Kiera found herself staring up at him, at eyes that were the color of dark wine, at a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't so utterly cold. No, not cold. Controlled. There was a difference, she realized. Cold implied absence. This was presence held in check. He reached for her wrists and she flinched back instinctively. His hands froze mid-motion, and something flickered across his expression too fast for her to read. When he spoke again, his voice had gentled, though it still carried that absolute certainty. "I'm going to remove these. They're tied too tightly." They weren't, actually. She'd been working them loose for the last 10 minutes, but his fingers were already at the knots, moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from centuries of practice, and the silk fell away. Her wrists were red where she'd been twisting them, and he saw. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Marcus Zimmerman," he said, not looking away from Kiera's wrists, "you will present yourself to my residence tomorrow evening to finalize the transaction. If you fail to appear, I will find you." Her uncle, standing at the edge of the platform with the auctioneer, actually bowed. Kiera had never seen him bow to anyone. "Of course, Your Majesty. It's an honor to..." It's not. Now the vampire did look at him, and Marcus went pale. It's a transaction, nothing more. Be grateful it's that. Then his attention was back on Kiera, and she felt the full weight of it. That dark gaze taking in her face, her dress, the way she was holding herself upright through sheer stubborn will. Can you walk? Yes. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Then walk with me. We're leaving. He didn't take her arm, didn't touch her at all, just turned and began moving toward the exit. The crowd parted again, and Kiera found her feet moving, carrying her after him, because staying on the platform seemed infinitely worse than following a vampire king into the unknown. At least the unknown held possibility. The platform held only the next bidder. The stairs up from the underground market seemed to go on forever. Kiera's heels clicked against stone, her breath coming faster as they climbed, and she became aware that the vampire hadn't spoken again, hadn't looked back to see if she was following. He simply moved with absolute confidence that she would. They emerged into a parking garage, concrete and fluorescent lights and the smell of car exhaust, so jarringly normal after the gothic nightmare below that Kiera nearly laughed. A black car waited, sleek and expensive, and the vampire opened the back door himself. Get in. Kiera stopped walking. Every instinct screamed at her not to get into the car, not to put herself in an even smaller space with a creature that could move faster than she could see, that could probably tear her throat out before she even registered the threat. Where are we going? My residence. He said it patiently, as if she were being slow. You can't stay here. I could leave. You could try. Something that might have been amusement touched his expression. You'd make it perhaps 3 blocks before one of the bidders from downstairs found you. Some of them don't take rejection well. Kiera's hands curled into fists at her sides. So my options are get in the car or get hunted down in the street. No. The vampire's expression shifted, the control slipping for just a second to reveal something that looked almost like pain. Your option is to accept my protection until the transaction with your uncle is finalized and you're legally free. After that, you may go wherever you wish. She stared at him. What? Get in the car, Kiera. I'll explain at the residence. You're drawing attention standing here, and I'd prefer not to have to kill anyone else tonight. The else hung in the air between them. Kiera got in the car. He closed the door, moved around to the other side with that inhuman fluidity, and slid into the seat beside her. The driver was human, she realized with a start, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who met Kiera's gaze in the rearview mirror and gave a small, reassuring nod. Home, Elena, the vampire said, and the car pulled smoothly out of the garage. They drove through the city in silence. Kiera watched the familiar streets pass by, the late-night diners and closed shops, the few pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks. Normal life, continuing as if the world hadn't just tilted sideways, as if she hadn't just been sold by her own blood. The vampire sat perfectly still beside her, hands resting on his knees, gaze fixed on something beyond the window. In profile, his face was all sharp angles and elegant lines, inhuman perfection that made her teeth ache. She wanted to demand answers, wanted to scream, wanted to cry, but pride kept her silent. She wouldn't break down in front of him. She wouldn't give him that. The car turned down a street lined with old mansions, the kind that had been built a century ago by railroad magnates and shipping tycoons, and pulled through iron gates that opened as they approached. The grounds beyond were extensive, trees and manicured lawns giving way to a house that looked like it belonged in a Gothic novel. All stone and tall windows and turrets that shouldn't have worked on a building this size but somehow did. Elena parked at the front entrance. The vampire was out of the car before Kiera could reach for her door handle, opening it for her, offering a hand that she deliberately ignored as she climbed out on her own. If he was offended, he didn't show it. The front door opened as they approached, revealing a massive entrance hall with a sweeping staircase and more art on the walls than Kiera had seen outside of museums. A woman waited just inside, small and neat in what looked like a housekeeper's uniform, her hair silver gray and her eyes sharp. "Margot," the vampire said, "this is Kiera Zimmerman. She'll be staying with us. Please prepare the blue suite and have dinner sent up. Something warm." Margot's gaze traveled over Kiera with swift efficiency, taking in the too tight dress and the marks on her wrists, and her expression softened. "Of course, Your Majesty. Miss Zimmerman, if you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms." "Wait." Kiera turned to the vampire, who was already moving toward what looked like a study off the main hall. "You said you'd explain." He paused, turned back. "I will. After you've eaten and had a chance to breathe. What you need to hear requires clear thinking, and you're running on adrenaline and fear. Give yourself an hour." "I'm fine. You're shaking." She was. Kiera looked down at her hands, saw the tremor she'd been trying to ignore, and felt something crack in her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, nails digging into her skin through the thin fabric of the dress. The vampire's expression shifted again, that careful control fracturing. He took a step toward her, stopped. "You're safe here. I know you have no reason to believe that, but it's true. Margot will take care of you. In 1 hour, I'll answer every question you have. I give you my word." "The word of a vampire." Kiera's laugh came out bitter. "How reassuring." "The word of Gavril Quintrell," he said quietly. "King of the Northern Courts, Lord of the Blood Council, and someone who swears by the old law that a vow once given cannot be broken without the loss of everything we are. So yes, reassuring." He held her gaze for another moment, then turned and walked into the study, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Margot touched Kiera's elbow gently. "Come, dear, let's get you sorted." The blue suite turned out to be larger than Kiera's entire apartment had been. Bedroom, sitting room, bathroom with a tub the size of a small pool, and a walk-in closet that Margot immediately began filling with clothes that appeared as if by magic, carried up by quiet staff members who didn't meet Kiera's eyes. The dress she'd been forced to wear went into a trash bag without comment. "Burn it," Kiera said. Margot smiled. "Already planning to." Dinner arrived while Kiera was in the bath, soaking away 3 days of basement grime and terror. She stayed in the water until it went lukewarm, until her fingers pruned and her racing thoughts began to slow into something approaching order. Then she dried off, pulled on the soft clothes Margot had left, jeans and a sweater that actually fit, and walked barefoot into the sitting room where the food waited. Soup, bread, roasted chicken, vegetables that looked like they'd come from someone's garden that morning. Real food prepared with care, and Kiera hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her. She ate mechanically at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as her body remembered it needed fuel. By the time she finished, she felt almost human again. A clock on the mantel chimed, 1 hour exactly since they'd arrived. A knock came at the door. Kiera opened it to find Gavril standing in the hallway, still in black, still radiating that controlled power. He'd changed clothes, she realized. The suit was different, simpler, as if he'd decided formality wasn't necessary. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped back, let him enter, closed the door. The sitting room suddenly felt smaller with him in it, his presence taking up more space than his physical form should allow. He moved to one of the chairs by the window, gestured to its partner. "Please, sit. This will take some time." Kiera sat, back straight, hands folded in her lap. "You said I could leave. You can. After the transaction is finalized. What does that mean?" Gavril was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "The auction tonight was illegal by human law, but recognized by certain elements of vampire society, old families mostly, who cling to practices that should have died centuries ago. Your uncle sold your legal custody to settle his debts with a vampire named Draven Thornwood, who operates these markets. The payment I made tonight transfers that custody to me." Custody. The word tasted like ash. "I'm 22 years old. By human law, yes. By the law of the old courts, you became property the moment the gavel fell." He said it without inflection, but she saw his hands tighten on the arms of the chair. "Tomorrow your uncle will finalize the sale. At that point I will have the legal authority by court's law to grant you permanent freedom, which I will do. Immediately." Kiera's breath caught. "Why?" "Because you're not property. Because no one should be." Gavril's gaze came back to her, sharp and impossibly dark. Because I stood on a block like that once, a very long time ago, and I remember what it feels like, every moment of it, and I will not be the reason someone else experiences that if I have the power to prevent it. The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of the clock. Kiera's mind raced, trying to process, to find the trap she knew had to be there. You were sold. I was. He said it flatly, as if he were discussing the weather. 300 years ago, when I was young enough and foolish enough to lose a territorial dispute badly. I spent a decade passing from owner to owner before I won my freedom. It took another century to build enough power that no one would dare try to bind me again, another century after that to claim the throne. And now you're the king. Kiera heard the skepticism in her own voice. You could end this. The auctions, the trade, you have the power. I have power within my territories. The northern courts answer to me. But vampire law is old and fragmented. Each court maintains its own rules, its own traditions. Draven Thornwood operates in neutral territory under the protection of the old council, and they care more about preserving tradition than protecting the unwilling. His expression hardened. I've tried for 50 years to convince them to outlaw the trade. They refuse. The best I can do is attend the auctions and buy freedom for everyone I can. How many? In 50 years? Hundreds. Perhaps 1,000. Not nearly enough. Gavril stood, paced to the window, his movements controlled but restless. Every person I free is a small victory. Every person left behind is a failure I carry. Kiera watched him, this ancient creature who moved like death and spoke like someone carrying the weight of the world. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked. Because you deserve honesty. Because... He stopped, turned to face her. Because you should know who's offering you freedom, what it means, what it costs. What does it cost? Nothing from you, from me. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. Draven doesn't like losing his merchandise, particularly not to me. He'll make his displeasure known. There will be consequences, but they're mine to bear, not yours. Kiera stood, moved closer until she could see the fine details of his face, the inhuman perfection of it, the weight in his eyes that came from centuries of living. You've done this before, bought people's freedom and faced the consequences. Every time I can. Why? Because someone should. Gavril held her gaze, and for the first time she saw past the control, past the regal bearing, to something raw underneath. Because I remember what it's like to wait on that block and know that no one is coming to help. Because I swore when I finally won my freedom that I would be the one who came, even if I couldn't save everyone, even if it cost me. The vulnerability in his voice unmade something in Kiera's chest. She'd spent the last 3 days building walls, steeling herself, preparing to survive whatever came next. But this vampire king who looked like death and spoke like someone who understood exactly what had been taken from her was dismantling those walls without even trying. I don't know how to thank you, she said quietly. Don't. Gavril's expression shuddered. I'm not doing this for gratitude. I'm doing it because it's right. Tomorrow, after the transaction is complete, you'll have papers documenting your freedom. Elena will help you access the funds I'm settling on you, enough to start over wherever you choose. Margot will provide whatever you need in the interim. You're not a prisoner here. You're a guest. And if I want to leave now, then I'll have Elena drive you wherever you want to go, and I'll do my best to keep you safe from the others who bid tonight. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the knob. But I hope you'll stay. Just until tomorrow. Just until it's legal and binding, and no one can contest your freedom. Kiera thought about the desperation in her uncle's face when the bidding had climbed beyond what he'd expected, thought about the way the other vampires had looked at her, calculating value like she was livestock, thought about this impossibly old, impossibly powerful creature who'd stood up in that terrible room and said 5 words that had changed everything. I'll stay, she said. Gavril nodded once, sharp and satisfied. Sleep well, Kiera Zimmerman. Tomorrow you become free. He left, closing the door silently behind him, and Kiera sank back into the chair. Her hands were shaking again, but this time from relief rather than fear. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, and let herself cry. The next morning dawned bright and cold. Kiera woke in the massive bed with no memory of getting into it, her dreams full of auction blocks and dark eyes and voices speaking in languages she didn't understand. Margot appeared with breakfast, warm and filling, and clothes that actually belonged to her, pulled from her apartment by staff who'd retrieved her things overnight at Gavril's order. "He's very thorough," Kiera said, running her hands over a sweater she'd thought she'd never see again. "He's very careful," Margot corrected. "There's a difference. His Majesty leaves nothing to chance when it comes to protecting people." "Has he done this often? Brought home people from auctions?" "Often enough." Margot began tidying the room, her movements brisk and efficient. "They usually stay a few days, get their bearings, then move on. Some stay in touch, most don't. I think it hurts him a little when they don't. But he never says so." Kiera absorbed that, the image of Gavril quietly hurting over the people he'd saved who didn't want reminders of where they'd been saved from. "Where is he now?" "His study. He's been there since dawn, preparing for your uncle's arrival." Margot's expression turned grim. "That man has a reckoning coming." Marcus arrived at sunset, escorted to the study by Elena while Kiera waited in the sitting room of her suite, too restless to sit still. She'd wanted to be there, to face her uncle, but Gavril had asked her to let him handle it, and something in his tone had made her agree. So she paced, wearing a path in the expensive rug, and tried not to imagine what was happening downstairs. 20 minutes later, Margot appeared at the door. "It's done. Your uncle is gone. His Majesty would like to see you in the study, if you're willing." Kiera followed her down the sweeping staircase, through hallways lined with art that probably cost more than her uncle's debts, to the study with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and massive desk. Gavril stood by the window, backlit by the dying sun, and he turned when she entered. "It's finished," he said. "You're free." He held out a folder, leather-bound and official-looking. Kiera took it with trembling hands, opened it to find page after page of legal documents, stamped and notarized, declaring her an independent entity under the law of the northern courts. There were bank statements, too, showing an account in her name with enough money to live on for years. "The house is yours, too," Gavril continued, "the one your parents left. Your uncle signed over the deed as part of his payment. He'd done damage, but it's structurally sound. It can be repaired." Kiera's vision blurred. She blinked hard, trying to focus on the papers, on the evidence of her freedom. "What about Marcus?" "He's been banned from my territories. If he returns, he'll face court's justice." Gavril's voice was flat, emotionless. "His debts are settled. He no longer has any claim on you, legal or otherwise." "That's it? He just walks away?" The anger surprised her, hot and fierce. "He sold me. He stood there and let them bind my wrists and parade me in front of vampires like I was cattle, and he just gets banned from territory I didn't even know existed until yesterday." "What would you have me do?" Gavril asked, and there was something careful in his tone. "Tell me what justice looks like to you, Kiera, and if it's in my power, I'll make it happen." She opened her mouth, closed it. What did she want? Her uncle arrested. He'd broken human laws, but those were nearly impossible to enforce against vampires. Her uncle hurt? She wasn't that person, no matter how angry she was. Her uncle, to understand what he'd done, to carry the weight of it the way she would carry the memory of that auction block forever. "I don't know," she said finally. I don't know." Gavril nodded slowly. "That's fair. You don't have to know right now. The papers are filed. The account is active. The house is legally yours. You have options. Time to figure out what you want justice to look like." Kiera looked up at him, at this vampire king who'd spent 50 years buying freedom for strangers, who carried the memory of his own enslavement like an open wound, who stood in the dying sunlight and offered her choices. "Can I stay? Here, I mean. Just for a few more days." until I figure out what comes next." Something flickered across his expression, there and gone too fast to name. "Of course. Stay as long as you need." The few days became a week, then two. Kiera found herself settling into life at the residence with unexpected ease. Margot was kind, Elena was patient, and the other staff treated her like a guest rather than an oddity. Gavril himself was often absent, locked in meetings or traveling to other courts on business he didn't detail, but when he was present, he was unfailingly courteous. He didn't press her about her plans, didn't ask when she intended to leave. He simply existed in the same space, a quiet presence that somehow made the massive house feel less empty. She caught herself watching him, the way he moved through rooms like he was dancing to music only he could hear. The way he spoke to his staff with genuine respect rather than the casual dismissal she'd expected from royalty. The way he went very still when he was thinking, as if centuries of life had taught him the value of absolute control. It was during her third week, when she ventured into the library late at night because sleep wouldn't come, that she found him already there. He sat in one of the deep leather chairs, a book open in his lap, and he looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much on my mind." Kiera moved to the shelves, running her fingers along leather spines. "What are you reading?" "Property law from the 1800s. Fascinating reading." His voice held dry humor. "I'm preparing arguments for the next council session. Still trying to end the trade? Always." Gavril closed the book, set it aside. "The council meets in 2 months. I present the same proposal I've presented for 50 years, they debate for hours, and then they vote to maintain tradition. But I keep trying." Kiera turned to face him. "Why do you think they refuse?" "Because ending the trade means admitting it was wrong to begin with, that the old families built their power on the backs of the enslaved. That tradition is sometimes just a prettier word for atrocity." He stood, paced to the window. "They'd rather cling to the past than face what that past actually was. That must be frustrating. It's infuriating." The words came out sharp, the first real anger she'd heard from him. "Every time they vote no, I think about the next person who'll stand on that block, the next family torn apart, the next life destroyed because tradition is more important than mercy." Kiera moved closer, drawn by the passion in his voice, the crack in his legendary control. "You really do hate this." "I lived it. I carry it. Every person I couldn't save." He stopped, his jaw tight. "Yes, I hate it. With everything I am." She reached out without thinking, her hand coming to rest on his arm. He went completely still under her touch, every muscle locked. For a moment she thought she'd overstepped, crossed some invisible line, but then his hand came up to cover hers, cool and solid. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for understanding. Most people don't want to hear about the darkness that lurks beneath pretty society. I've seen the darkness now." Kiera's voice was soft. "Kind of hard to ignore it." They stood there in the quiet library, her hand warm on his arm, his hand cool over hers, and something shifted between them. Something that had been building since he'd climbed onto that platform and cut her free. Something that felt inevitable and terrifying and right. Gavril broke the moment first, stepping back carefully, his expression shuddering. "It's late. You should rest. So should you. I don't need sleep the way humans do." But he smiled, just a little. "Though I appreciate the concern." Kiera wanted to push, to ask what he'd felt in that moment, whether the connection was just in her imagination. But his posture had shifted, the king returning, and she let it go. "Good night, Gavril." "Good night, Kiera." She made it to the door before she turned back. "For what it's worth, I think what you're doing matters. Even if the council never listens. Even if you can't save everyone. It matters." He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes was worth 1,000 words. The next morning, everything changed. Kiera was having breakfast in the sunlit dining room when Gavril appeared, moving with unusual speed, his expression grim. "We have a problem." She set down her coffee. "What kind of problem?" "Draven Thornwood has filed a complaint with the old council. He's claiming I obtained you through coercion, that the sale was invalid, and that you should be returned to his custody pending a formal investigation." The room tilted. Kiera gripped the edge of the table. Can he do that? He can try. Gavril's voice was tight with controlled fury. The council has agreed to hear his case. If they rule in his favor, you'd be taken back into custody until the matter is resolved, which could take years. No. The word came out fierce. No, I'm not going back, I won't. You won't have to. Gavril moved to her side, his presence solid and sure. I'll fight this. The sale was legal, the documentation is flawless, and you're free under every law that matters. Draven is angry I cost him money. This is retaliation, nothing more. But the council might listen to him. They might. He didn't lie to her, didn't offer false comfort. Which is why we need to be prepared. I have lawyers, good ones. We'll present your case, show the council that your freedom is absolute and non-negotiable. Kiera stood, her chair scraping against the floor. When is the hearing? 3 days. 3 days. 72 hours until she had to stand in front of ancient vampires and argue for the right to exist as a free person. The thought made her want to vomit. Gavril must have seen it in her face because his expression softened. I won't let them take you. Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do, you won't go back to that. I swear it. You can't promise that. You don't control the council. No. But I control my territories, my resources, and my own willingness to go to war if necessary. He said it calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than starting a potential conflict. Draven thinks he can use the council to bully me into compliance. He's wrong. Going to war over me seems excessive. Going to war over the principle that freedom, once granted, cannot be revoked? Gavril's eyes were hard as stone. That's not excessive. That's necessary. If the council rules that they can simply take back freedom on a whim, then everything I've built, every person I've saved, means nothing. So yes, I'll go to war if I must. The certainty in his voice unmade her. Kiera felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. I don't understand you. I'm no one. I'm human and mortal, and I'll be dust before you're even middle-aged by vampire standards. Why does this matter so much to you? Because you're not no one. Gavril's voice gentled. You're Kiera, who spent 3 days tied up in a basement and came out fighting, who stood on that platform with your head held high, who asked me why I couldn't end the trade entirely instead of just accepting rescue. You matter because everyone matters, because the moment we start deciding some lives are worth fighting for and some aren't, we become the monsters humans already think we are. I fell in love with you, Kiera said, and watched his eyes widen in shock. I know I shouldn't say that. I know it's too fast and too complicated, and you probably have protocols about getting involved with humans you've saved from auctions. But if I'm going to stand in front of that council in 3 days and fight for my freedom, I'm not doing it while lying about how I feel. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Gavril stared at her like she'd grown a second head, his legendary composure completely shattered. Kiera, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to feel the same way. I just needed you to know. Because you matter too, and someone should tell you that. She was shaking again, adrenaline and fear and the terrifying vulnerability of having just laid her heart bare. I'll be ready in 3 days. Whatever the council decides, I'll fight it, with or without you. She walked out of the dining room with her head held high, made it to the staircase, and then Gavril was in front of her, moving with that impossible speed, his hand catching her wrist. With me, he said. Always with me, if you'll have me. Kiera's breath caught. What? I've lived for 3 centuries. I've seen empires rise and fall, watched the world change in ways I never imagined possible. And in all that time, I've never met anyone like you. His thumb brushed against her pulse, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. You fell first, I understand, but I fell harder. Watching you rebuild yourself over these weeks, seeing your strength, your defiance, your refusal to be diminished by what was done to you. Kiera, you're magnificent. And if you meant what you just said, then yes, I feel the same way. Completely. She kissed him, rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and he made a sound low in his throat, his arms coming around her, pulling her close. He was cool to the touch, solid and strong, and he kissed her like she was precious, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for centuries. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gavril rested his forehead against hers. "We do this together. The council, Draven, all of it. You're not alone anymore." "Neither are you," Kiera whispered. The 3 days before the hearing passed in a blur. Lawyers arrived, grave men and women in expensive suits who spread documents across every surface of Gavril's study and spoke in dense legal language that made Kiera's head spin. She signed papers, gave statements, recounted the auction in excruciating detail to people who took notes without judgment. Gavril was with her through all of it, a constant presence, his hand finding hers whenever the memories became too sharp. On the second day, Elena took Kiera shopping for what she called council-appropriate attire. They returned with an outfit that was elegant without being submissive, powerful without being aggressive. Kiera tried it on that evening, standing in front of the mirror in her suite, and barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who belonged in a vampire court, someone strong. "You're beautiful," Gavril said from the doorway, and she turned to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "Though you always are." Flatterer. But she smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. He crossed to her, took her hands. "Tomorrow will be difficult. The old council doesn't like to be challenged, and Draven is clever. He'll try to make this about protocol and tradition rather than what actually happened. What do I do? Tell the truth. All of it. What your uncle did, what the auction was like, what I offered you. Let them see you as a person, not a piece of property to be haggled over." His grip tightened. "And know that whatever they decide, I meant what I said. You won't go back." Kiera leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I'm scared." "So am I." The admission surprised her. Gavril pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I'm terrified they'll rule against us, that I won't be able to protect you, that I'll lose you to the same system that nearly destroyed me. But fear doesn't mean we don't fight. It means we fight harder." She kissed him then, pouring every ounce of fear and love and determination into it. He responded in kind, his control finally breaking, kissing her like she was air and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both trembling, he touched his forehead to hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I love you. I need you to know that." "I love you too," Kiera whispered. "Now let's go make sure tomorrow doesn't tear us apart." The council chambers were located beneath the city, in a network of tunnels that predated modern construction by centuries. Gavril guided Kiera through passages lit by electric lights masquerading as torches, past guards who bowed as he passed, to massive doors carved with symbols she didn't recognize. The lawyers flanked them, their faces professionally neutral, their briefcases full of ammunition. "Ready?" Gavril asked. Kiera straightened her spine. "Yes." The doors opened onto a chamber that stole her breath. It was huge, the ceiling vaulted and lost in shadow, the walls lined with more vampires than she'd ever seen in one place. They sat in tiered rows like an ancient amphitheater, all white hair and pale skin and eyes that reflected the light. At the center of the floor was a raised platform, and at the far end, elevated above everyone else, sat 5 figures on elaborate thrones. The old council. The original vampires, if the whispers were true. The ones who'd built the courts and made the laws and ruled their kind for millennia. Draven Thornwood stood near the platform, flanked by his own lawyers. He was tall and elegant, his white hair pulled back in a severe style, his suit immaculate. When he saw Gavril, his lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Majesty, how kind of you to join us." "Thornwood." Gavril's voice could have frozen water. "I'm surprised you had the audacity to file this claim." "Merely protecting my interests." Draven's gaze slid to Kiera, and she forced herself not to flinch. "The sale was conducted properly. You interfered through intimidation. The council should adjudicate." One of the council members, a woman who looked carved from ice, raised a hand. "Silence. We will hear the arguments. Lord Thornwood, present your case." What followed was the most surreal hour of Kiera's life. Draven's lawyers spoke eloquently about protocol and tradition, about the sanctity of auction law, about how Gavril's presence at the auction had intimidated other bidders. They produced documents, witness statements, even a recording of the auction itself where Gavril's voice could be heard clearly stating he would take her home. He didn't participate in proper bidding, Draven argued, his voice smooth. He simply announced his intention and expected everyone to comply. That's not how auctions work. That's coercion. Gavril's lawyers countered with documents of their own, showing that Gavril had bid according to protocol, that his final offer had been accepted by the auctioneer, that the sale had been completed legally. They argued that Draven's complaint was retaliation for losing a profitable sale, nothing more. Then it was Kiera's turn. She stood on the platform, facing the council, and tried not to shake. Hundreds of vampires watched from the tiered seats, their expressions ranging from curious to contemptuous. The council members themselves were unreadable, ancient faces showing nothing. "Tell us what happened," the Ice Woman said, "from your perspective." So Kiera did. She spoke about her parents' death, about trusting her uncle, about the 3 days in the basement where she'd slowly realized what he intended to do. She spoke about the auction, about standing on the platform in a dress that wasn't hers, about the way the bidders had looked at her like she was merchandise. "And then Gavril stood up," she said, her voice steady. "He climbed onto the platform and removed the ropes they'd tied me with. He told my uncle to come the next day to finalize the transaction. And then he took me to his residence, gave me food and clothes in my own rooms, and told me I would be free." "Did he touch you?" one of the council members asked. "Force you in any way?" "No. He gave me choices. Stay or leave, eat or don't. Trust him or not. He's given me nothing but choices since the moment we left that auction." Kiera met the council's eyes, refusing to back down. "Draven Thornwood had me bound and displayed like livestock. Gavril Quintrell gave me freedom and dignity. One of those men is worthy of your council's protection. The other isn't." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Draven's expression tightened. The council conferred in whispers too low for human ears. Kiera waited, her heart pounding, Gavril's presence beside her the only thing keeping her grounded. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the Ice Woman spoke. "We have reached a decision. The sale was conducted according to auction law. However, Lord Quintrell's subsequent actions were also legal. He purchased custody and then granted freedom, which is his right as the purchasing party. The human is free. The complaint is dismissed." Relief crashed through Kiera so hard her knees nearly buckled. Gavril's hand found hers, steadying her, but Draven wasn't finished. "With respect, Council, this sets a dangerous precedent. If any vampire can simply purchase and immediately free auction merchandise, the entire system becomes meaningless." "Perhaps it should be meaningless," Gavril said, his voice cutting through the chamber. "Perhaps the system itself is the problem." The silence that followed was absolute. "You speak of ending the trade." The Ice Woman's tone was neutral, but there was something sharp underneath. "Again, I speak of acknowledging that slavery, whatever we call it, whatever traditions surround it, is a stain on our people. That every person sold on those blocks is someone's child, someone's family, someone's future stolen." Gavril stepped forward, and the crowd leaned in, captivated despite themselves. "I was property once. I stood where Kiera stood. I know what it means to be bought and sold and traded like livestock, and I spent centuries building power so I could stand here and tell you that it has to end." "Your feelings on the matter are noted," another council member said, his voice dry. "But tradition? Tradition is just peer pressure from dead people," Kiera interrupted, and every head in the chamber swiveled toward her. She felt Gavril tense beside her, but didn't stop. "I'm human. I don't know your laws or your history. But I know what it feels like to be powerless. And I know that systems don't change because powerful people suddenly grow consciences. They change because someone makes them change." The Ice Woman studied her with new interest. "Bold words for someone who stood on our auction block last month." "Someone who was freed from your auction block last month," Kiera corrected. "By a vampire who spent 50 years trying to do the right thing while you all debate tradition. Don't you get tired of being on the wrong side of history?" The chamber erupted. Vampires surged to their feet, some shouting agreement, others outrage. The council called for order, but the chaos had already spread. In the middle of it all, Draven moved. He was fast, inhumanly fast, crossing the chamber floor in a blur of motion. His hand caught Kiera's arm, yanking her away from Gavril, and she felt his other hand lock around her throat. "If I can't have her as property," Draven hissed, his breath cold against her ear, "then she's worthless to me alive." Then Gavril was there, moving faster than Draven, his hand closing around the other vampire's wrist with enough force that bone cracked audibly. "Release her. Now. Or what? You'll kill me in front of the council." Draven's grip tightened fractionally. That would be murder. They'd have to act. "Try me." Gavril's voice was death itself. "Harm her, and I'll tear you apart so slowly you'll beg for true death long before I grant it. Council be damned." The Ice Woman stood. "Draven Thornwood, release the human immediately. This behavior is beneath you. This human disrupted our entire system." Draven's control was fracturing, his voice rising. "She and your precious king think they can overturn centuries of tradition with pretty speeches. Someone needs to teach them their place." "Their place is above you," another council member said quietly. "Release her, or we'll have the guards do it." For a moment, Kiera thought Draven would refuse, would snap her neck just to make his point. His hand trembled against her throat. Then Gavril applied more pressure to his wrist, bone grinding against bone, and Draven gasped and let go. Kiera stumbled back. Gavril caught her, pulling her behind him, his body a shield between her and Draven. "You just threatened her life in front of the entire council. That's not a complaint about protocol. That's attempted murder. She's not one of us. Human law doesn't apply here." "My law applies in my territories," Gavril said, "and you just broke it. I could kill you right now and be within my rights." The chamber held its breath. Draven straightened, cradling his broken wrist, his expression twisted with rage. "You won't. You're too noble, too concerned with doing the right thing." "You're correct. I won't kill you." Gavril's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire space. "But I will destroy you. Your auction house, your network, every vampire who works for you. I'll dismantle it piece by piece until there's nothing left but ash and memory. And then I'll make sure every court knows exactly what you tried to do tonight. The council won't allow it. The old families are tired of you." The Ice Woman's voice cut through Draven's protest. "We've overlooked your excesses because the trade was legal, but threatening a free human in our chambers? Attempting violence against a king's declared partner? Lord Thornwood, you've exceeded even our tolerance." Draven's face went pale. "You can't be serious." "We are entirely serious." She looked at Gavril. "Your Majesty, your proposal to end the trade will be reviewed at our next session. We make no promises, but given tonight's display, we're willing to reconsider our position." The chamber erupted again, but this time with a different energy. Kiera could feel the shift, the tide turning. 50 years of Gavril arguing for change, and all it had taken was one moment of Draven's violence to make the council listen. "Furthermore," the Ice Woman continued, "Draven Thornwood's operations will be investigated. If we find evidence of other violations, appropriate action will be taken. This session is adjourned." The council members rose and filed out. The crowd began to disperse, vampires clustering in groups to discuss what had just happened. Draven stood alone in the center of the chamber, his broken wrist hanging at his side, his expression murderous. "This isn't over," he said. Gavril smiled, and it was terrifying. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." They left Draven standing there and walked out of the chamber together, Gavril's arm protectively around Kiera's shoulders. The lawyers followed, looking somewhere between shocked and pleased. In the hallway outside, away from the crowd, Kiera finally let herself shake. "You okay?" Gavril asked immediately, his hands gentle as he checked her throat where Draven had grabbed her. "He was going to kill me." "But he didn't, and he never will." Gavril pulled her close, his voice fierce. "I'm sorry. I should have anticipated he'd try something." "You can't anticipate everything." Kiera leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Did that really just happen? Did the council actually agree to reconsider? They did. It's not a guarantee, but it's more progress than I've made in 50 years. Gavril pulled back enough to meet her eyes. You did that. Your words, your defiance. You made them see what I've been trying to show them all along. We did it together. Kiera managed a shaky smile. Now what? Now we go home, we rest, and then we prepare for the next session because the council will reconsider, but that doesn't mean they'll vote our way. We'll need arguments, documentation, testimony from those we've freed. He touched her face gently. And we'll need you, if you're willing to stand before them again. I'm willing, Kiera said immediately. We're finishing this. Gavril kissed her, soft and sweet, a promise and a thank you wrapped into one gesture. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. I love you. Whatever comes next, I love you. I love you too. Kiera took his hand. Now take me home. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind. Word of Draven's attack spread through vampire society like wildfire, and the reactions were sharply divided. Some vampires saw it as proof that the old ways needed to end, that the trade was creating monsters. Others saw it as political maneuvering, an excuse to dismantle a profitable system. Gavril worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and testimony. Humans he'd freed over the decades came forward, telling their stories, adding their voices to the chorus demanding change. Kiera worked beside him, coordinating schedules, reviewing documents, reaching out to other victims. They made a good team, she realized. His centuries of experience combined with her fresh perspective created something powerful. But Draven wasn't idle either. His network was vast, built over hundreds of years, and he used every connection he had to fight back. Vampires loyal to him attended meetings arguing that ending the trade would destabilize the entire courts system, that it would take away a necessary check on human population growth, a safety valve for territorial disputes, a dozen other justifications that made Kiera sick to hear. How can they think like that? She asked one evening, after a particularly frustrating conference call with a group of old family representatives. How do they not see that they're talking about people? Because to them, humans aren't people. Not really. Gavril rubbed his temples, exhaustion showing for the first time. They're resources, property. They've thought that way for so long it's become truth to them. You don't think that way. I did once, before I was taken. He looked at her, his expression raw. I was young and arrogant, and I thought immortality made us superior. It took being sold, being owned, being treated like an object, to understand that power doesn't equal value. That everyone, human or vampire, deserves dignity. Kiera moved to him, wrapped her arms around him from behind. You're going to win this. We're going to win this. I hope so, because if we don't... He didn't finish the sentence, but she heard the fear underneath. If they didn't win, the trade would continue. More people would suffer. Everything he'd worked for would be for nothing. We will, Kiera said firmly. We have something Draven doesn't. What's that? We're right, and eventually, that has to matter. The council session was scheduled for the first day of spring, a symbolic choice that wasn't lost on anyone. New beginnings, fresh starts, change. The chamber was packed when they arrived, every seat filled, vampires standing in the aisles. The council members sat in their thrones, their expressions grave. And on the floor, surrounded by his lawyers, Draven Thornwood waited. His wrist had healed, Kiera noticed. But something in his posture suggested the damage went deeper than bone. He looked diminished somehow, his legendary confidence shaken. The Ice Woman called the session to order. We are here to consider the proposal submitted by King Gavril Quintrell of the Northern Courts, that the practice of human trade be outlawed in all courts' territories, effective immediately. Lord Quintrell, present your case. Gavril stood, and the chamber fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. 300 years ago, I stood on an auction block. I was young, defeated, and terrified. I spent a decade as property, passed from owner to owner, used and discarded and broken in ways that still wake me at night. When I finally won my freedom, I swore that no one else would suffer as I had. that I would use every ounce of power I gained to end the system that had destroyed me. He paused, letting the words sink in. For 50 years I've brought this proposal before you. For 50 years, you've chosen tradition over mercy, profit over dignity, comfort over change. And for 50 years, the trade has continued. Thousands sold, thousands lost, thousands who will never be free because we, as a people, decided that our convenience mattered more than their lives. A screen lowered from the ceiling and images began to play. Humans on auction blocks, their faces blank with shock. Children torn from parents, families destroyed. And then, different images, the same people, years later, rebuilding their lives. Working jobs, raising families, living free because Gavril had bought them and let them go. These are the people you've dismissed as property, Gavril continued. These are the lives you've decided don't matter. Look at them, see them, and ask yourself if tradition is really worth this cost. More images. Testimony from those he'd freed, their voices strong and clear as they described what had been taken and what had been returned. Kiera watched vampires in the audience shift uncomfortably, watched even the council members lean forward, paying attention. Then it was Draven's turn. He stood, composed himself, and began to speak about economic impact, about treaty implications, about the chaos that would follow if the trade were suddenly outlawed. His arguments were logical, well-researched, compelling, but they rang hollow against the images of human faces, against the testimony of survivors, against the simple truth that no economic benefit justified treating people as commodities. When both sides had finished, the council conferred. They spoke for nearly an hour, their voices too low to hear, while the chamber waited in tense silence. Kiera held Gavril's hand so tightly her fingers ached. Finally, the Ice Woman stood. "We have reached a decision." The chamber held its breath. "The trade is ended, effective immediately. The buying and selling of humans is outlawed in all courts' territories. Existing contracts are void. All currently held property is to be released within 30 days. Any vampire found violating this law will face immediate imprisonment and trial." The chamber erupted. Some vampires cheered, others shouted in protest. Draven's face went white with fury, and Gavril pulled Kiera into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We did it," he whispered against her hair. "We actually did it." Kiera was crying, she realized distantly, tears of relief and joy and vindication streaming down her face. 50 years. You fought for 50 years and we finally won." "No." Gavril pulled back, cupped her face in his hands. "You won. Your courage, your words, your refusal to be silent. You made them see. I just gave you the platform." Around them, chaos continued, but in their small bubble, there was only each other. Kiera kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and pride and hope into it, and he responded in kind. When they finally broke apart, the Ice Woman was watching them with something that might have been approval. "King Quintrell, the Council recognizes your decades of advocacy. You will oversee implementation of the new law in your territories. We expect your usual thoroughness." "You'll have it." Gavril's voice was steady, but Kiera could feel him shaking. "Thank you. Thank your partner." She reminded us what we'd forgotten. The Ice Woman's gaze settled on Kiera. "You have a future in vampire politics if you wish it. Few can move the council the way you did." "I just told the truth," Kiera said. "Sometimes that's enough." The council member inclined her head, a gesture of respect, and returned to her throne. Gavril guided Kiera out of the chamber, past vampires who nodded or glared depending on their position, past Draven who watched them with murderous eyes but said nothing. Outside, in the hallway, Elena waited with the car. "I heard," she said, her eyes bright. "Congratulations, Your Majesty, both of you." "Thank you, Elena." Gavril helped Kiera into the car, then slid in beside her. As they pulled away from the council chambers, he finally let himself sag against the seat, exhaustion and relief written across his face. Kiera curled into his side. "What happens now?" "Now the real work begins. We have to dismantle Draven's network, release everyone currently held, create systems to ensure the law is enforced." He looked down at her. "It will take months, maybe years. Are you still willing to help?" "Always," Kiera said without hesitation. We started this together. We finish it together. There's something else. Gavril's voice turned serious. Enforcing this law across all territories will require people who understand what it means to be on both sides, people who know the human perspective and the vampire world, people who can bridge the gap. You want me to work with you, officially. I want you beside me in all things, as my partner in court politics, in implementation, in life. He took her hand. I know you're human. I know that means your lifespan is limited compared to mine. But I don't care. I want every moment we have together, and if you're willing, I want to offer you a choice. Kiera's heart raced. What kind of choice? You can remain human. Live a full human life. I'll love you for every moment of it, no matter how brief by my standards. Gavril's voice was careful, making sure she understood this was truly her decision. Or, when you're ready, I can turn you, make you immortal. It's not without cost. The transformation is painful, and you'd give up sun and certain foods and aspects of humanity. But you'd have centuries instead of decades, time to see the changes we've started come to full fruition. The offer hung between them, enormous and life-changing. Kiera thought about what she'd learned in the last months, about vampire society with its ancient politics and rigid hierarchies, about immortality with its endless years and the weight of watching mortal friends age and die, about Gavril himself, this complicated, passionate, damaged man who'd spent centuries fighting for what was right. I want to think about it, she said finally. Not because I'm uncertain about us. I love you and I want forever with you. But this is a big decision and I want to be sure I'm making it for the right reasons. That's wise. Gavril kissed her temple. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. The next months were a blur of activity. Gavril and Kiera worked with courts officials to identify every auction house, every holding facility, every vampire involved in the trade. They coordinated releases, helped freed humans find housing and employment, dealt with vampires who tried to circumvent the new law through creative interpretation. Draven fought them at every step. He used legal loopholes, filed complaints, even attempted to organize other old family vampires into a coalition to challenge the council's ruling. But his support crumbled as more details of his operation came to light. Slaves held in substandard conditions, children separated from parents, punishments that violated even the old trade's limited regulations. Finally, 6 months after the council's ruling, Gavril and Kiera stood outside Draven's main auction house with a team of courts officials. This is the last one, Gavril said quietly. After this, the trade is truly ended. He's inside, one of the officials reported, with what he claims is his personal staff, but we suspect is actually the last of his inventory. Then let's finish this. Gavril glanced at Kiera. You don't have to come in. This might be difficult to see. I'm coming. Kiera's voice was firm. We started this where I stood on his auction block. We end it the same way. They entered the building together, courts officials flanking them. Inside was exactly what Kiera expected and worse. A grand space set up for display and sale with platforms and chains and all the trappings of commodifying human lives. And on those platforms stood nearly 30 humans, ranging from teenagers to middle-aged adults, all wearing the blank expression of people who'd given up hope. Draven waited in the center of the room, his white hair gleaming in the dim light, his expression defiant. This is private property. You have no authority here. We have the council's authority, which supersedes yours. Gavril moved forward, his voice carrying through the space. Draven Thornwood, you are in violation of court's law. These humans are to be released immediately. They're my property, purchased before the law changed. The law voids all existing contracts. You know this. Gavril gestured to the officials who began moving among the platforms, releasing the confused humans. It's over, Draven. Accept it. Never. Draven's control finally snapped. He moved fast, pulling something from his coat, and Kiera saw the flash of a blade before Gavril shoved her aside and caught Draven's wrist mid-strike. They struggled, moving too fast for human eyes to follow, and then Gavril twisted and there was a sickening crack. Draven screamed, the knife clattering to the floor, and Gavril had him pinned against one of the platforms. You're done, Gavril said, his voice deadly calm. "You'll be tried before the council for violating the new law, for attempting to harm a king's partner, and for every abuse we've uncovered in your facilities. Whatever sentence they give you will be more mercy than you deserve." Draven sagged, the fight draining out of him. "You've destroyed everything I built." "No, I've freed everyone you imprisoned." Gavril released him to the guards who'd rushed forward. "There's a difference." As Draven was led away, Kiera moved among the freed humans, helping the officials explain what was happening, where they'd be taken, how they'd be helped to rebuild. Their expressions slowly shifted from blank to confused to hopeful, and watching that transformation was worth everything. The last woman off the platforms was young, maybe 19, with long dark hair and terrified eyes. She saw Kiera and immediately asked, "Are you the one? The one who spoke to the council?" "Yes," Kiera said gently. "You're free now, all of you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," I thought. "I didn't think anyone would come." "Someone will always come now," Kiera promised. "That's what the new law means." They spent the rest of the day processing releases, arranging transportation, ensuring everyone had somewhere safe to go. By the time they finished, the sun was setting and Kiera was exhausted. Gavril found her sitting on the steps outside the auction house, staring at the empty building. "You did it," she said as he sat beside her. "You really did it. The trade is ended. No more auction houses. No more blocks." "We did it," Gavril corrected. "None of this would have happened without you." Kiera leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I've been thinking about your offer, about immortality." Gavril went very still. "And? I want it. Not because I'm afraid of dying or because I want to stay young forever, but because there's so much work left to do. We ended the trade in Court's territories, but there are still rogue operations. Still vampires who think the old ways were better. Still humans who need help rebuilding." She looked up at him, seeing her future reflected in his dark eyes. "I want to spend centuries fighting beside you. I want to see the world we're building actually take shape. I want forever with you, not because I need it, but because I choose it." Gavril cupped her face in his hands, his expression radiant. "Are you certain? The transformation is permanent. There's no going back." "I'm certain." Kiera kissed him softly. "When can we do it?" "Whenever you're ready. Tonight, if you wish. Or we can wait. Give you time to prepare, to say goodbye to your human life." Kiera thought about her apartment, empty since she'd moved to Gavril's residence, about her parents' graves, which she visited every week, about the life she'd expected to live before her uncle had destroyed it. "I want to visit my parents first, tell them goodbye in a way, and then tonight, on the ashes of this place like you suggested to the council." "You remember that?" Gavril sounded surprised. "I remember everything you've said to me." Kiera stood, pulled him up with her. "Take me to the cemetery. Then we'll come back here and burn this building to the ground, and from those ashes, I'll be reborn as something new." They visited her parents' graves as the sun set fully, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Kiera knelt between the headstones, running her fingers over the carved names. "I know you probably wouldn't understand this choice," she said softly. "Human daughter becoming a vampire. But he saved me, and together we're saving others. I think you'd approve of that part at least. I think you'd want me to be happy. And he makes me happy, Mom, Dad. He makes me want to be better, do more, reach further, so I'm going to take this chance. I'm going to live forever. If forever means I get to keep fighting for people who can't fight for themselves." Gavril stood a respectful distance away, giving her space. When Kiera finally stood, tears on her cheeks, he offered his hand. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They returned to the auction house as midnight approached. Gavril had arranged for the building to be destroyed, the land reclaimed, but he'd asked for one final night inside. Now he and Kiera stood in the main room, surrounded by empty platforms and broken chains, and he pulled her close. "This will hurt," he warned. "The venom burns as it changes you. You'll feel like you're dying because, in a way, you are. Your human self will end and something new will begin. I'll be with you through all of it, but I can't take the pain away. I can handle pain. Kiera tilted her head, exposing her throat in a gesture of absolute trust. I'm not afraid. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Gavril kissed her softly, then moved to her neck, his lips gentle against her pulse. I love you, in this life and the next and all the centuries after. I love you too, Kiera whispered. Now make me immortal. His fangs sank into her throat, and fire flooded her veins. Kiera had thought she understood pain. The auction, the bindings, the terror of not knowing what came next. But this was different. This was burning from the inside out, every cell in her body simultaneously dying and being reborn. She screamed, couldn't help it, and Gavril held her through it, his voice a constant murmur of comfort even as the agony consumed her. Time lost meaning. It could have been hours or days. She had no way to tell. There was only fire and Gavril's voice and the slow, inexorable transformation of everything she was into something new. Then, gradually, the pain receded. Her senses sharpened. She could hear Gavril's heartbeat, slow and steady, could smell old blood and fear embedded in the auction house walls, could see in the darkness as clearly as if it were noon. She opened eyes that she was certain would be different, would reflect light like a cat's, and found Gavril watching her with an expression of wonder. Welcome to immortality, he said softly. Kiera tested her new body, feeling the strength in muscles that had been merely human hours before. Everything was brighter, sharper, more intense. How long? 6 hours. You survived the transformation beautifully. Gavril helped her stand, and she moved with a grace that felt foreign and natural all at once. How do you feel? Powerful, hungry, different but still myself. She looked around the auction house, seeing it with vampire eyes. Burn it. I want to watch it turn to ash. They set the fires together, Gavril using his centuries of experience to ensure the building would burn hot and fast. Then they stood outside, watching flames consume the place where so much suffering had occurred. Other vampires arrived, drawn by the fire or summoned by Gavril, and they stood in silent witness as the auction house collapsed in on itself. When only ashes remained, Gavril turned to the assembled vampires. The trade is ended. This building stood as a monument to our worst impulses. Now it's gone. In its place we'll build something better. A memorial to those who suffered, a reminder of what we've left behind, and a promise that we'll never return to these practices. The vampires murmured agreement. Not all of them, Kiera noted with her new sharp senses. Some still clung to the old ways. But enough had changed, had seen the light, had decided that tradition mattered less than progress. One of the humans they'd freed that day approached, the young woman with dark hair. She'd been given shelter in a courts-funded facility, but she'd asked to come tonight to see the auction house burn. Thank you, she said to Kiera and Gavril both, for fighting for us, for not giving up. Thank you for surviving, Kiera replied, for being brave enough to rebuild. That takes more courage than anything we did. The woman smiled, then rejoined the other freed humans who'd gathered to witness the destruction. They stood together, a unified front, and Kiera felt fierce pride at what they represented. Survivors, victors, free. As the night wore on and the ashes cooled, people began to drift away. Elena approached with the car, but Gavril waved her off. We'll walk, it's not far, and I think we need the time. They walked through the quiet city streets, newborn vampire and ancient king, hand in hand. Kiera tested her new abilities, listening to conversations happening blocks away, seeing details she'd never noticed as a human. The world was so much bigger than she'd realized, so much richer and stranger and more complex. What happens now? She asked as they approached the residence. The trade is ended, Draven is imprisoned, the auction houses are destroyed. What do we do next? We build. Gavril squeezed her hand. We create systems to help freed humans integrate into society. We hunt down the rogue operations still running outside court's jurisdiction. We work with the council to ensure the new laws are enforced. We live, Kiera. We have centuries ahead of us, centuries to make the world better. Together, Kiera said. Always together. They entered the residence to find it transformed. Margot had organized a celebration, inviting the staff and the freed humans and vampires who'd supported the fight to end the trade. The halls were full of music and laughter, human and vampire mingling freely for perhaps the first time in Court's history. Kiera and Gavril moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, sharing stories, planning next steps. And through it all, they remained connected, hands clasped, a unit facing the future as one. As the night deepened toward dawn, they finally escaped to Gavril's private study. He poured wine, dark and rich, and they stood by the window, watching the sky begin to lighten. "I should miss the sun," Kiera said thoughtfully. "But I don't. Not when this is what I have instead." "You can still see dawn," Gavril pointed out, "and sunset, just not full daylight. That's enough." Kiera turned to face him, taking in the face she'd spend eternity looking at. "This is enough. You're enough." Gavril set down his wine, pulled her close, kissed her with the passion of someone who'd waited 300 years to find his equal. When they finally broke apart, both smiling, he rested his forehead against hers. "I was alone for so long, fighting this fight by myself, thinking I'd never find someone who understood. And then you stood on that auction block with your head held high and your spirit unbroken, and I knew you'd change everything." "We changed everything together," Kiera corrected, "and we're going to keep changing it, for centuries." "For centuries," Gavril agreed. Outside, the sun continued to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside, a newborn vampire and her ancient king stood together, planning their immortal future, ready to face whatever challenges came next. The trade was ended, the auction houses were ashes, and from those ashes something new had been born. Not just Kiera's transformation, but a fundamental shift in vampire society. A recognition that power came with responsibility, that tradition could be questioned, that change was possible. In the months and years that followed, Kiera and Gavril worked tirelessly. They established programs to help freed humans rebuild their lives. They trained courts officials in the new laws. They hunted down rogue operations and brought their operators to justice. They stood before the council again and again, advocating for further reforms, pushing for progress. And in the quiet moments between battles, they loved each other with the fierce devotion of two people who'd fought their way to freedom and found each other in the process. 5 years after the trade ended, they stood together in what had been Draven's auction house, now transformed into a memorial. The walls were covered with names, thousands of them, everyone who'd passed through the trade and lived to tell about it. At the center stood a statue of a figure breaking free from chains, face turned toward the light. "They asked me to speak," Gavril said, gesturing to the crowd gathering for the memorial's dedication. "But I think you should do it. Your voice started this. It should be your voice that marks its end." Kiera looked at the assembled crowd, human and vampire mixed together, all gathered to remember and honor those who'd suffered. She thought about the terrified girl who'd stood on an auction block, who'd thought her life was over. She thought about the vampire king who'd stood up and said 5 words that changed everything. She thought about love and freedom and the long fight for justice. Then she stepped up to the podium and began to speak, her voice carrying across the memorial, strong and clear and full of hope for the future they were building together. "We're here today to remember what was and celebrate what is, to honor those who suffered and acknowledge those who survived, to look at where we've been and see clearly where we're going. The trade is ended. The auction houses are gone. But the work isn't finished. It won't be finished in our lifetimes, mortal or immortal. Because freedom isn't a destination, it's a practice, something we choose every day with every decision." She found Gavril in the crowd, his eyes bright with love and pride. "Someone once told me that tradition is just peer pressure from dead people, that systems change because someone makes them change. Today, we're all that someone. Everyone in this room, everyone who fought and survived and refused to accept that suffering was inevitable. We changed the world, and we're going to keep changing it. For as long as it takes, until everyone is free and no one stands where I once stood, wondering if anyone would come." The crowd erupted in applause. Human and vampire united in their commitment to the future. And as Kiera stepped down from the podium into Gavril's waiting arms, she knew with absolute certainty that they'd made the right choice. All of them. Together. Forever.